Hello to all. Here today in the Tier 8 French premium battleship, the Gascogne. We're here today on the map Land of Fire. Mode is Domination. And we are in 7 to 9 matchmaking from the looks of it, although it looks like it's closer to 8-9 matchmaking. So we are kind of bottom tier, but more like mid tier. Anyhow, loading up onto the match. This is a carrier game, so this should be a bit problematic considering the Gascogne's AA suite is not fantastic. But in addition to that, there's an Alsace, FDG, Sovietsky Soyuz, North Carolina, and Lenin. And then a rune, which is going to be definitely annoying, for reasons we'll get to. Dmitry, Donskoy, Arago, Mogador, Friesland, and Kid. So several HE threats from the destroyers. No real HE spammers, like these are all HE threats, but they don't do absurd amounts of damage, unlike something like a Seattle or a... What other HE spammers are there at tier 8-9, like Cleveland, Seattle. So they're annoying, but not horrific. Anyhow, spawning in, below the sea cap in the Gascogne, you'll note the rather strange looking hull. This is of course a half-sister of the tech tree tier 8, the Richelieu. And as such it shares many traits with the Richelieu, starting with the main battery. Like the Richelieu, she has 2 quad turrets of the 15-inch caliber, so that's 381mm for those of you using metric. However, unlike the Richelieu with her all-forward setup, the Gascogne has her guns separated out into a forward and rearward battery, making up a, well, A and X turret, you could say. And in this AX layout, you can see the gun angles they're alright, but they're relatively poor, definitely inferior to having 2 guns forward for the obvious reasons that your guns aren't all forward, so on occasion you will be likely to bring a gun offline, particularly when you are maneuvering. The turrets themselves are the standard French 15s. Considering shooting at the small door here, just wanted to see where he was going to turn, didn't quite squeeze off the shot. So anyhow, these French 15s are quite responsive. Shells glide quite quickly, but they are 381mm shells nevertheless, and come with the obvious weaknesses of not overmatching 27mm plate, which is why the rune comes into play. With her 27mm plate, she is a cruiser that we can't overmatch through nose. So like the Richelieu that comes before her, or that comes with her, the Gascogne does have certain limitations in having relatively small caliber rifles, especially for the tier, and this is coupled with a relatively low barrel count of 8. Okay, I briefly spot the Arago, but then I get unable to spot him. He's turning away, but the Arago has 25mm plate. At this range, any shells I fire into him will overmatch. He did briefly spot me though, so he might have torped, so I'm going to duck behind this rock. Someone else, probably a Soyuz, absolutely chunks him out. Some battleship shells from the look of it, sailing in toward me. Pretty much completely broadside at the moment, but trying to catch and finish off this Arago. Now, even though she has relatively low gun caliber, she does unfortunately still have a relatively long reload, unlike the 26-second reload of the Tirpitz and Bismarck, which share her barrel count, as I chunk that North Carolina for a little bit. She has a 29-second reload, so still slightly better than the 30-second standard of the Richelieu, but nothing to write home about. Arago decides that he would like to risk my shells, give him a fair amount of lead even at this distance. Shells are fast though, so they should plunge quite easily, but in addition to having low barrel count and rather long reload, she does also have, well, French dispersion at this point, the former German dispersion, which means that she's not the most accurate. You can see here I have to bring quite a bit of broadside to bear in order to unmask my rifles. Doesn't look like I'll get a shot on that FDG that I want. So let's try again for the Arago. He just fired, so I expect the Ibuki to spot him. Just gotta wait a little bit. Looks like Ibuki doesn't quite have line of sight, so I'm stuck here. Now you'll note earlier I popped my speed boost. There's the Attica torpedoes. This is of course a standard French battleship speed boost, so 8%, and it runs for, in this case, 180 seconds. You start with 4 charges, but at 8% and with a base speed of just about 30 knots, it's not the most impressive consumable in the worworld. While it does not increase your rather standard speed, okay, another ugly salvo, showing off the Gascogne dispersion. Well, it doesn't increase your speed by that much. 8% of 30-ish knots is about 2 knots. It does enhance your maneuverability and responsiveness quite a bit, and what I mean by that is that your ability to start and stop on a whim is greatly enhanced. This of course applies to all French battleships, but it is notable that the Gascogne has it. Now, as a French battleship, she does share standard French battleship armor scheme. Okay, this North Canada looks pretty broadside, but he's not. You can tell based on the minimap. However, I am still able to chunk him pretty hard for 13,000. I aimed quite high, so no citadels potentially, but I'm gonna limp away, showing my stern. Now against battleships, 32mm plate isn't quite so problematic, although he did still just chunk me for quite a bit. But running away, at the very least, unlike the Richelieu, I do have the advantage of having an entire gun rearward, so my firing angles rearward are somewhat superior. Looks like he's not quite angled enough to stop my pens. So with those high velocity French 15s, just gonna hit that North Carolina, which has a fairly fragile citadel armor scheme. Gonna wait for him to reach that gap as he's reversing. Waiting. I lost vision, unfortunately. And I'm border sliding. At this point, it would be easier to accelerate off the other way. While I do so, though, I will move my rear gun back onto target. Didn't quite manage to squeeze off the other salvo. Rearward angles are decent, but not fantastic. And my shells already hit the rock, unfortunately, so no dice for me as I take some more superstructure penetrations. So we have control of C, and thankfully my team has moved out of C, except for, you know, me. So I should really get with the program and do that as well. But the enemy does control the center cap. We do have a bulk force here though, so hopefully we can wrest it from them. My speed boost is about to come up, and I'm gonna need it because I'm currently sliding on the border, which means I have reduced engine power. So the extra 8% engine power should help me get off this border. Now, in addition to the speed boost, the Gascogne has a relatively standard looking consumable set, except her heal is a little bit unique. For those of you who are familiar with the Massachusetts and the so-called Massachusetts heal, well, it should be said that the Massachusetts heal should probably be called a Gascogne heal, because the Gascogne was the first ship to have this kind of fast accelerating heal. So you can see here a standard heal amount, or slightly reduced heal amount, I guess, at 379 per second for 28 seconds. However, the cooldown is extremely short at just 36 seconds, which means you can use it while under quite intense fire to quickly recover hit points in short order, repeatedly. The Gascogne does need this because her health pool at 63,000 is pretty average, maybe even a little bit below average for tier 8, and she has French battleship armor, so that means 32mm plate pretty much all over, which means she takes large amounts of damage from high explosive. She doesn't shatter any HE shells, unlike, say, the Bismarck or the Tirpitz with their 50mm and 40mm midsections. So she does tend to make use of most of her HP and heals. Now, as a fast Republic-esque battleship, you can see the layout is kind of reminiscent of a small Repub, except she doesn't have the accelerated reload or the enormous overmatching guns. The Gascogne does tend to play kind of similarly, kind of like an enlarged cruiser playing on flanks. Which is what I was doing, but kind of overdid it, if you will, by kind of reaching the border and sliding. Now I could have advanced, but the problem there was interesting damage for those penetrations. I could have advanced forward, but the problem is the FDG's secondaries are quite powerful, even if they don't pen me for the most part. Although he has the 128s, I believe, so he does pen with most of his secondaries. giving quite a bit of broadside. Gonna angle in a nice 9k chunk. You can see the French 15-inch guns are no slouch. Ricochet most of the salvo, take 1 pen. Just gliding forward using my speed to reposition. There's that rune I mentioned earlier with 27mm plate. So if he angles properly, he will be able to ricochet my shells. Oh, there's a Mogador in front of me. Where is it? Oh, it's not the Mogador spotting me. Unless there's another Mogador. Don't think so. So somewhere in front of me there is a kid, more than likely. There's that rune. He is quite broadside. So let's see if we can send these high velocity French 15s and get enough hits to kill. You can see there's that large spray, but at distance, the French 15s are some of the better 15s in the game. They're pretty high velocity. A higher velocity certainly than the Bismarck Interprets' 15s by a little bit. So easily able to sail the shells across the map. Now you'll note my range is actually quite large. 23.8 kilometers, so I'm able to get away without slotting a spotter plane. This is a trait shared by most of the high-tier French ships, except, well, surprisingly, the Alsace, who has kind of gimped range for whatever reason. I'm broadsiding the FDG right now, but 1, he's not looking at me, and 2, I'm not overly concerned. French battleships do have a soft turtleback, which prevents them from eating citadels in most fashions. You can see there that I'm going to take a fire, but since I have 4 heal charges and that fast cooldown heal, I'm very happy to just heal tank that fire. I've been firing mostly AP, but the French HE is fine. It does decent damage at 5400 per shell. Fire chance is pretty whatever, but it's serviceable. Soyuz looks like he's going to get rammed by this FDG, so goodbye Soyuz guy. And there you have it. Spotted again. I expect the kid is directly behind this rock, so there's going to be a salvo of Benson torps headed toward me soon. With that said, I'm going to switch over the high explosive, just in case I do happen to bump into the kid. My shells shatter against the Alsace. Interesting. At this point, I don't have any particularly easy targets. But since I have HE loaded anyway, I'll just fire into the Lenin in the distance. We are currently losing. Kid slipped past me into the cap. Can't do anything about that, so I'm just gonna move across the map, try and kill this Lenin on the way in, who's threatening my carrier. Looks like he repair partied my fire, so I'm gonna give him one more blast from the frontal gun, but you can see here the AX layout kind of showing its disadvantages in this case, because I did not have that second gun to bear immediately. Reset my fire. Using my speed to kind of sail across the map and rejoin the battle. As long as this Lenin dies, we should be fine. Lenin is angled against me now, so I'm gonna have to aim for superstructure. But he is crisping quite nicely. Kid's in the opening of the gap now at this point. But I'm gonna ignore him. He's gonna retake this cap behind me, but what can you do? Shells sail across the map, and 1 overpen is enough to mop up the job. I'm gonna switch just to high explosive immediately. I don't know where the Soyuz is, but I do see the Alsace. Once more, I have to turn my turrets around the ship, but what can you do? Alsace looks like he's gonna be forced to leave my cap, which is good, because that means we'll be up 2 caps temporarily, or up a cap temporarily. He's smoldering already, but angled, which is why I have opted for the high explosive ammunition. Pretty mediocre penetration there. Targeted by probably the kit behind me. Soyuz is in cover. Gonna stay on the Alsace and contribute damage as just an oversized cruiser. But thanks to my large range, I am actually going to guard this cap. Set another fire, hopefully it'll help finish off the Alsace. Oh, the Soyuz is in the cap now. But I am going to go around and potentially guard this cap. Don't want this kid doing anything. Carriers so far left me alone, the enemy Enterprise, but do note that my AA is not particularly impressive. I'm still spotted, he exited from there, so he's probably in the north. Changing my course. Cannot see the Soyuz, but he is somewhere right there. There we go. Information. Enterprise coming to challenge. Now I get to show off my mediocre AA. I'm broadsiding, but remember I have that turtle back. In addition, French battleships do have decent torpedo bulge. 8k, I'm just going to heal now because I am going to take some torpedo damage, I anticipate. Trimming the fighter of the Enterprise. Mostly able to mitigate the damage. Gonna need the Chapaya's help, but at this point, since I know where the Soyuz is, I can just bow in. I have 32mm plate. Kind of overhealing because I didn't take quite as much damage as I thought I would. Oh, there's the APDBs. Now Enterprise APDBs can be extremely deadly, so want to avoid that if possible. So give a slight angle to minimize my cross section as best I can, but I do have to angle against the Soyuz as well. But French battleships have French armor schemes, and French armor scheme is actually quite resistant to armor-piercing bombers. He's on this side. My sector's not ready yet. Got a fire. My heal is ready again, as you can see. Soyuz is giving me broadside. Take one citadel or maybe a bunch of penetrations from the Soyuz. At this point, switch back to the AP. Hopefully I can reload before he crosses the corner, but I'm gonna head toward the other cap at this point. Pop my speed boost on cooldown. It's been a long, grindy game, as you can see. Soyuz disrespecting my 15s. Not moving very fast either, so I'm gonna give him a nice punch, hopefully. One citadel. My fast charging heal functioning to keep me in the game. I'm gonna angle, which is gonna take my rear gun offline, so again showing off the disadvantage versus that of the Richelieu. My carrier does get dispatched, which is concerning because carriers are worth a lot of points. But he's still giving enough broadside for my French 15s to give him quite a slap, hopefully. Again, one fire, not worth repairing because fires repair fully. His turret's turn, however, so let's use that fast reloading heal once more. Looks like the Enterprise is in fact inside the cap. I'm gonna need this citadel. Alright, no dice. French dispersion. So once more I have to bring my guns online. He's turning in toward me, so those are likely to ricochet. So it's gonna have to be the frontal gun. This time I have to repair for obvious reasons. I am dying. Instead of fire, but he's got that Soviet damage control, and unfortunately, because my guns have relatively poor dispersion, and the Chapayev did not appear to be providing sufficient support fire, we are probably going to lose this game. But still, a pretty good game for a relatively mediocre ship, considering. My Graf Zeppelin did not seem to be the brightest person in the world in terms of just sitting there while the Sovietsky Soyuz came increasingly closer and closer. And the Enterprise will clean up the game. Unfortunate. But we did get to show off that in spite of having relatively poor AA power, the French armor is relatively resistant to much of the firepower the Enterprise can bring, at least with pretty good torpedo bulge. Obviously not very good powers of resisting rocket damage and fire damage. but pretty good ability to resist torpedo and AP dive bomber damage. Anyhow, 163,000 damage, 78 target hits, 21 aircraft shot down, 1 in cap, 2 ships destroyed, 5 fires, 5 hits to the Citadel, 1 capture ribbon, 45 target hits, and 5 planes interdicted by my fighter. Team score wise, 1700, pretty nice, well ahead of the rest of the pack, which unfortunately had a disappointing performance. A carrier in particular who survived till the end of the game, well, he did not do particularly well, as you can see. So not the most experienced player. Unsurprisingly, the enemy Enterprise at the top of the scoreboard. So before we continue, oh, okay, let me just reselect that. This is the Gascogne using the Maid of the New Orleans camo. This is one of the camos you can earn with one of the older French collections, I believe. It's an alternate camo for the Gascogne that you earn alongside the alternate camo for the Richelieu. It's actually quite a pretty camo. You can see that masthead or figurehead at the front. Actually quite nice. And the gilding is decent, although the texture is not the most sharp. And then you got those winged laurels onto the turrets as well. Anyhow, so you can see a pretty large ship. About the same size as a Richelieu, but with more extensive structure towards the rear and less towards the front, due to the placement of the guns. You can see she also has an extensive secondary battery, so she does pack a mean punch, but unfortunately the French secondaries with their 100mm caliber are a bit too low to penetrate most things that you want them to penetrate without a significant investment into skill points such as IFHE, so for the most part they tend to be a fire starting tool more than anything else. As I mentioned, French armor on the Gascogne, so you will see entirely 32mm plate. That's extremities, deck, and rear. And then standard 19mm superstructure. Turrets themselves are French turrets, so note the 430mm front face, but it is very flat, which means it's not particularly angled, which means if people shoot into the front face of your turrets, you are liable to lose them, so the turrets are a little vulnerable. Now if you strip away the bulge, you'll note the main belt of 320mm, which is fine. Not special, but not weak. So if I strip off everything else, this is the Citadel. So you can see above the Citadel there is a soft turtleback, so this is the actual Citadel, and this is the turtleback that I was mentioning. It's more steeply angled than the French one, or than the German one, you'll note, however, so at longer ranges, you'll still easily take Citadels. So, excuse me. There is still something to be said about proper angling. Once you pass the Citadel, however, once you pass the turtleback, however, the Citadel is relatively flat. You have a slight stretched out octagon in shape, but usually the shape is not particularly relevant. The Citadel armor plates are fairly thick outside of this broadside section, which has 30. Okay, maybe I'm hallucinating. I thought that said 30, but apparently it said 40, so never mind that. I was gonna say if it's 30, it can be overmatched, but okay, no. Here we go. There's one bulkhead in the very center that's 30, but that's beneath the water. So plunging shells, I guess, that hit the center of the ship will be vulnerable to overmatch by basically anything that can overmatch 30mm, so Republic guns are larger. So do keep that in mind. Even though you have this turtleback that prevents most Citadels and close range brawls, you still are vulnerable if you are not careful. Captain build wise, just using my standard Repub captain. I mean, it makes sense. The Gascogne plays a bit like a miniaturized Repub, but without the advantages of overmatch. So a very standard build. In terms of priority target, probably Adrenaline Rush first, especially if you're going for Jean-Jacques Henri. French turrets are fairly responsive, so they don't really need Expert Marksman. After that, since the Gascogne has a fast loading heal, take Superintendent, then Fire Prevention, then Concealment Expert. Then after that, since Jean-Jacques Henri has an improved Expert Marksman anyway, I choose to take Expert Marksman, but You could opt to take Jack of all trades and expert loader first, it's kind of up to you. But the core build is about 16 points, and then the last 3 points, or the core build is actually 14 points, sorry, and then the last 5 points you can spend wherever you want. This is just my preferred spec. Anyhow, it's sad that that game was a defeat, but that game was a pretty good showing of the strengths and weaknesses of this gun, Gascogne. Firstly, she's thinly armored, so she takes a ton of damage. We didn't get fired upon by HE that much. If we go back to the detailed report, for example, you will note that from damage received, mostly AP shells in this game, from the Soyuz and such, in this case. Toward the end of the game when we had to kind of dodge bombs and rockets and torpedoes and such, so the mix of damage meant that we probably should have tanked a little more of the Enterprise's munitions, to be honest, and tried to mitigate the Soyuz. We did inflict large amounts of damage back because he was being rather negligent, but you saw there, at close ranges, his Soviet dispersion definitely had the advantage, and his bigger, more powerful 406mm Russian rifles were able to punch through quite cleanly. But as you can see from all this battleship damage, even though I have relatively low caliber guns, the French high velocity rifle is still a pretty damn powerful gun. 830mm or 830 meter per second shells, which have pretty good retention of shell velocity. And then the HE shell, as I mentioned, is pretty decent. 37% chance of fire. 5400 HE alpha, it's held back only by the relatively standard reload of 28 seconds, not 29, sorry about that. Anyhow, I'll wrap this up here. It's disappointing we weren't able to pull out a win, but the game was a good summary of the ship. So I'll catch you all later, and I hope you all enjoyed. Cheers.